Panthers podcast. This is episode number 44. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. My latest guest today here on Inside the Vault, he is an ESPN draft analyst and insider, formerly at Bleacher Report. You can find him on Twitter at NFL Draft Scout. He is Matt Miller. Matt, welcome to Inside the Vault, my man. How are you?
Ryan, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Before I jump into football specifically, give our listeners a brief summary in case they're not familiar with your work, kind of what you do, your background, and obviously you were at Bleacher Report, recently now at ESPN, for people who might be unaware of what you do.
Yeah, so at ESPN, I'm one of four amazing NFL draft analysts. Mel Kiper Jr., obviously, the guy who kind of started this industry that we're all in. Field Yates, Jordan Reed, and myself cover the draft really year-round. You know, we're evaluating prospects. We're talking to coaches, scouts, agents, the players themselves, really to give, people at home that peek behind the curtain. You know, if you watch Hard Knocks where they're covering the Giants offseason, so many of those scouts, are watching players. We're doing the same thing, but instead of reporting to a general manager, we're reporting it to you guys, basically. So I started in this industry a long time ago. I think I kind of consider like 2006 to be when I think that's when I first started getting paid to do it. So that's what I consider the start, but I was doing it long before then. So like you mentioned, 10 years at Bleacher Report from when Bleacher Report was an office in San Francisco in like a closet. It was tiny, 10 years there. And then was fortunate enough to make the jump to ESPN, where I've been since 2021. So love it. And it's been fun, evaluating all the different iterations of the Carolina Panthers during that time. So I'm excited to talk about this upcoming season.
Yeah. Before we get into the Panthers offseason and for this year, let's jump back to the draft class. 7 picks. Dan Morgan, the new general manager, Panthers great. I'll just kind of let you go where you want to go. Xavier Legette was the first pick, all the way down to Michael Barrett is the last pick. So give me your thoughts on the Panthers draft class as a whole. You thought maybe who was their best pick? And is there a guy that might be sneaking up on Panther fans, maybe the NFL this year in this draft class?
Yes, I've known Dan a long time, so I'm really excited to see him finally get his shot. He's been one of those dudes, when you talk about, like, I do these lists every year, like, who are the up-and-coming general managers. He's been on that list for like a decade. So it's awesome to see him get his shot to run a team. I think he's going to do a fantastic job. And this offseason, I was a good point to that. You talked about the first pick, Xavier Legette. He was one of the guys I was putting on Twitter, like, probably during his pro day, I think was when it was, like, this dude is tailor-made for the Panthers. I would love to see him go to the Panthers. So many people were mad at me for saying that. It was like, no, but he's exactly what I think Bryce Young needs, somebody that can extend the strike zone, somebody that can win on slant routes. I broke into this industry where a guy like Alshon Jeffrey was kind of my calling card of a guy that I had said, hey, he's going to be a really good player. He's a second-round pick, became a Pro Bowler and a true number one receiver. I don't want to helmet scout these guys because they both went to South Carolina, but I think Legette can be a similar type guy who much faster than Alshon, but he's going to be able to win on slants. He's going to be able to win on comebacks to where he's going to make the job easier for the quarterback. So I love that for them. Also, Jonathan Mingo didn't have a great rookie season, but now you've got some bodies out there. You've got some size, which is something they really lacked. So I love that for Bryce. And then the last pick, Michael Barrett, was someone I was very bullish on, as the fact that, no, he wasn't going to be a top 100 pick, but I thought he had starter ability coming out of Michigan. Now, there's some injury stuff. He's not going to blow you away with size or speed, but he reminded me of Nick Bolton, who I see a lot of Chiefs football because I live just south of Kansas City. Nick Bolton is never going to blow you away as like the fastest guy in the NFL, but it's just his instincts, his timing, the leadership skills are all there. They're all really good. I saw the same thing from Barrett. I was at the Michigan Pro Day and just kind of fell in love with the person as well. So I love the kind of that, anchor points of this draft class for Carolina. They got my top running back in the draft in Jonathan Brooks, who we could spend our full 20 minutes talking about how much I love Jonathan Brooks. Trevin Wallace is one of the best athletes of the linebacker position. So it was, when you go into the draft without a first round pick, it's tough, right? You're limited as to what you can do, how many impact players you can add. But I think to get Legette, to get Jonathan Brooks, those are 2 really good picks to start your draft off with. And then I thought they found great depth throughout the rest of the 6 rounds.
Yeah. And I'm actually really bullish on Jachavian Sanders. I know the Panthers haven't had a guy like Greg Olsen since Greg Olsen obviously left. Even in his last year was not Greg Olsen-like, in my opinion. But he's someone I think can come in and be as a rookie guy who could just be a dependable third down break for Bryce Young, and someone I think is going to be could be a real sleeper as a rookie in this league.
Yeah, if people are watching, they can see over this shoulder my little Texas helmet. So I'm a huge Texas fan, which I have to put aside when I evaluate players. Jatavian was one of those dudes where he was never going to blow you away with testing. That just wasn't who he was. But if you watch them play on Saturdays, which is what I have a sticky note on my monitor that says drafts good football players, because it's like we get so caught up in 40 times and the combine and all that stuff that we forget who was actually good at playing football in the fall. And Jatavian Sanders is 2 years at Texas, really brought the tight end position back. It was not used, from Jermichael Finley to now, it was not used. And so for JT to be that guy, he's going to crush seam routes. He's very good after the catch. He's a high effort blocker who can get better there. So I think it was a really smart, a really safe pick, especially in the 4th round. If you'll remember in season, there was some top 50 talk for him. And it's just the testing times were poor is why he dropped. So you have the high athlete in Tommy Tremble. Now you have kind of the dependable guy in JT. I think that's a really fun 1-2 punch. Ian Thomas is obviously there as well still. But I think JT, like you said, he could emerge. And what's cool from this draft class, you could have your number 1 receiver, your number 1 running back, your number 1 tight end, all in one draft class. That is a great way to build around a young quarterback.
Well, and Deontay Johnson we do have right now as well with that trade.
Right.
And I think he's someone, if he balls out, Panthers will easily resign him, and he'll grow with Bryce Young as well. Get me kind of your summary from this offseason for the Panthers. Obviously, we couldn't get any lower than they were last year. 2-15, fire Frank Reich, in comes Dave Canales, out of Scott Fitterer, now Dan Morgan, who was in the building as AGM, now our new general manager here in Carolina. So talk to me about kind of those moves in the Panthers offseason as a whole, and then we can get into some more specific stuff. But just what did you think of their offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always tough when you have, kind of an ownership group that comes in and they really want to put their stamp on things. And I think there's been some justified criticism of what Dave Tepper's done. I think there's also been some, everybody loves to judge everything that happens instead of waiting for the bigger picture. Remember the Nick Sirianni press conference, everybody like, oh my God, what is this guy? And then he took him to the Super Bowl, right? So it's like, well, sometimes we need to chill. And I think that's where right now, you could look at Dave Canales and say, hey, did Carolina have to maybe shoot below their radar? You couldn't go after a Ben Johnson. Did you have to maybe lower your tier a little bit? That doesn't change the fact that Dave Canales is a really, really good coach. And to be able to, have the defensive staff that they have, I think is going to help a lot because, Dave is an offensive guy. He's a young head coach. He's going to get to focus on his side of the ball. That seems to be the mashup that a lot of people are going to right now. And it's working really well, even to the point. Kansas City does that. I think people forget that. Andy Reid has absolutely nothing to do with the defense. That's why he has a former head coach, Steve Spagnuolo, who does that. He just lets Steve do his thing. And it's worked very well for them. So that certainly works. I like it. Like I said, I'm a Dan Morgan fan as a human being, as an evaluator. He was, even before I knew him, he was consistently on lists as who's an up and coming general manager. I think it is tough to go home. We've seen that over and over again. But I think he earned his way there, to go Seattle and all the places he's jumped around, learning how to be an evaluator, learning how all the different roles you have to run a team. I think he's in a good spot. And, the frustration of the questions on ownership are going to go away as soon as this team wins. I've seen that covering so many teams over the years where you hear about a head coach and a general manager who don't get along, but then they start winning and they're best friends, or an owner and a head coach who don't get along. How long do they hold it together in New England? As long as you're winning, everything seems to work. And so I think that's, the pressure right now in Carolina is you want to make sure, you want to prove that you got it right when you picked Bryce Young over CJ Stroud. That's, whether people want to admit it or not, it's in the back of everyone's mind right now, right? And so that's the key right now, I think, is proving that Bryce was the right pick and that they can build the right team around him.
Yeah. We'll get into Bryce Young in just a second, but first, the defensive end position. You mentioned Hard Knocks. Obviously, Brian Burns was the big trade to the Giants from the Panthers. Frankly, I think the Panthers could have got more for him, but we'll leave that on the table. Panthers working out 2 guys this week, apparently, Carl Lawson and then Yannick Ngakoue as well, coming to the Carolina for a couple workouts. Maybe they can be someone that the Panthers could sign opposite Jadeveon Clowney. So your thoughts on kind of Brian Burns and that trade and how that affects, this group, like I said, with Clowney, with maybe one of these signings. And then, because really, if you think about it, Ajero Avero and the entire defensive staff was retained. That doesn't happen in the NFL like ever.
Right.
So
not with a firing. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
So I think the Panthers defense is going to be slept on a little bit. I'm not saying they're going to be top 10 or anything. I mean, I'd say they're going to be a good middle of the pack defense. J.C. Horn is someone I think doesn't get a lot of respect around the league. Derek Brown, who I think is now a top 3 defensive tackle, maybe top 5, since Aaron Donald's now retired. So, and if J.C. Horn stays healthy, he's right up there with Pat Surtain, with Sauce Gardner. I think a lot of people just don't watch him because he's in Carolina and he's been hurt a lot of his career. So, talk to me about the defense this year.
Yeah, I think, let's go back to Brian Burns. They could have got more. The Rams offered more. It's just a matter of who was calling the shots at the time. So this front office couldn't have got more. I think that's important to point out. Dan Morgan would have taken the 2 firsts from the Rams. I'm pretty confident about that. But you can only take what's offered to you. I think a lot of times we live in a world, and, I'm a big guy. I love Madden. I love fantasy football. But they have really altered our thinking on how teams build. Because of Madden, we think, oh, well, we traded Brian Burns, we'll just draft a replacement. There's no creative prospect in the real world. So you can't just draft a defensive end to replace him. So I think you can look at the roster right now and be like, man, Clowney has not been a very good pass rusher. You could say, oh, last year, obviously Myles Garrett was probably the best pass rush he's had since early in his career. You mentioned the 2 veterans they could bring in. That Carl Lawson is someone I'm a big fan of, especially, as a situational rusher. We'll see who else, if someone becomes available. All that to say, the great news for the Carolina Panthers is the 2025 draft class is absolutely loaded at defensive end. And I would say it might even be the strongest position in the entire class. And you'll have a first-round pick again. So that's what's important, is sometimes your setting moves up. And you would love to go into the 2024 season with a young pass rusher who's got 10 sacks a year. But the reality is those guys don't grow on trees. They're hard to find. Right. And so I think to say, hey, we restarted our clock at defensive end. We're going to draft a guy that we probably don't have to pay for 4 to 5 years. That's really going to help the long-term cap health of this team. You mentioned it. I think Derek Brown is criminally underrated. I'm such a huge fan of his. And hopefully, that defense as a whole can kind of get back to where some of these guys were previously. If J.C. Horn could stay healthy, he's so talented. I'm a believer in Jordan Fuller, who I had a 6th round grade coming out of Ohio State because he just wasn't very fluid, wasn't very fast, but he's so smart. He's so instinctive. He's such a great leader from the safety position. And I think you can say the same for Xavier Woods. So they've got guys. And as you mentioned, it's just a matter of, I think some of it is getting the guys for your scheme in there. It takes time as well. We'll see what that other pass rush spot looks like. But it also helps, the quarterbacks you're going to be playing week in and week out in the South, outside of Kirk Cousins, are not super prolific. Not to take anything away from Baker Mayfield and Derek Carr, but there's some opportunities to get some picks and to limit people in terms of points.
Yeah. Let's talk about Bryce Young. What does year 2 kind of look like for him in terms of success? Because last year, Adam Thielen was the guy for Bryce Young essentially here. You bring in now Xavier Legette, Deontay Johnson. I'm a big Terrace Marshall Jr. fan. I know you probably had a good grade on him coming out, and he just doesn't seem to have gotten he's gotten chances. He just hasn't seemed to click in the league. And I've said it ad nauseum on these podcasts with different people, and they all are like, "Yep, he's got to prove it." He Canales has given him one last shot. Let's see what he can do. So I think Bryce has the weapons. But in your mind, what does year 2 look like for Bryce Young and as being a successful year for the Panthers?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, this is almost oversimplified, but to not look lost. People ask me all the time, like, what should I look for when I'm watching a rookie quarterback early in the year? You just want to see someone who's in command, someone who's comfortable and confident, to where things don't look panicked. I think that would be a huge step for Bryce. A lot of that wasn't on him last year. The offensive line has to play better this year. They obviously invested, in Robert Hunt to help with that. That's going to shore things up. Building that inside out protection, like we've seen so many teams do, is going to be great. That's going to help him a lot. I think now you have levels at the receiver position. You have Deontay, who's going to be able to stretch the field. We talked about Xavier Legette and the young tight end, so they're going to give you some of that intermediate stuff. You have Jonathan Brooks, who's going to be healthy coming out of the backfield, that can be an Alvin Kamara-like option. I was actually at the Alabama-Texas game where Bryce led that second half comeback. Yeah. People forget most of that comeback was him throwing to Jahmyr Gibbs on like Texas routes. So, that's something that he's really comfortable doing. Jonathan Brooks is going to help with that. So I think the biggest thing for Bryce is, I would say I would probably run more no huddle. I would go more up tempo to just try to get him comfortable. I'd let him take some shots too, get the ball out faster a little bit. and try to use some of the weapons that you've built around him would be key for me. I think you could even to some degree, like, look at what San Francisco does. Brock Purdy is not the biggest guy. He's not the fastest guy. He doesn't have the strongest arm, but he's smart. He's on time. He's very rhythmic as a passer. They do a lot of pre-snap motion so that he can diagnose before the ball's in his hand even. I would do a lot of that to try to help out Bryce, and then just, let him go back there and fling the thing a little bit.
Yeah. And it's funny because Panthers have had talent over the past, I don't know, 5-6 years just leave the building. And we mentioned Brian Birds, DJ Moore, the big trade to get Bryce Young. And then heck, Christian McCaffrey, he now stays healthy, and obviously he's doing his thing in San Francisco. So I think the key for the Panthers going forward is, you saw this with Derek Brown early this offseason, rewarding the talent that is there and making sure people know, hey, if you perform at an elite level, you're going to get paid and you're going to be one of these foundational pieces here. And so I think that's important for the Panthers certainly going forward because, again, you can't change the past. What's done is obviously done. Big picture, what does 2024 Panthers success look like? We talked about the division. Tampa Bay obviously is 3-time division winner. Baker Mayfield lost Canales. He does have Liam Cohen, who he is familiar with, but still an unknown. Can he do what he did last year again? The Saints defense is getting a lot older, and Derek Carr is Derek Carr is now. And Kirk Cousins in Atlanta, they have the potential, but Kirk Cousins is coming off the Achilles, and he's 36 years old. So I think Panthers can compete this year. I don't think they're going to win the South. That's not what I'm saying. I just think they can. If they win enough ball games and stay enough in competitive in ball games, they can sneak a few wins out that maybe they weren't supposed to. So thoughts on the Panthers this year, and can they compete somewhat in the NFC South?
I think, I would say, and people might not want to hear this, I think 6 or 7 wins are very realistic. However, if they win 9 games, we will be able to look back to July 24th, you and I talking and saying, man, they have all those weapons on offense. You've got, the defensive staff returning. You could see a pathway to that happening, right? To where it's not completely out of the question. Like the Texans last year. If I had been on a Texans podcast in late July, we would have been saying, like, hey, if you win 6 or 7 games, that looks great. Well, they won a lot more than that. And it was easy.
Yeah, they did.
You could see why, the fingerprints were there for you to say, like, oh yeah, okay. Well, that all came together. For Carolina, there are those things to where if everything does come together, like you said, if JC Horn can stay healthy, if they can find an alternate pass rush, those are the things that you could say, maybe they win 8 games, and Bryce taking that next step is a huge part of that. If Bryce can become like a Brock Purdy, a Tua, even if he can be that level of quarterback, who is, and this isn't negative, if he can be a point guard back there, he doesn't have to be a playmaker. If he can just be a point guard and be a great facilitator, then they could win a lot of games. I know he has a gigantic chip on his shoulder to prove that he should have been the number 1 pick. And those 3 guys they drafted in rounds 2, 2, and 4 to help him are certainly going to play a big part of that.
Yeah. Matt Miller has been my guest, ESPN draft analyst insider at ESPN here on Inside the Vaults. Last 2 for you, Matt. What is something that we're not talking about enough when it comes to the Panthers? Let's be honest. I know Charlotte, the Panthers aren't going to get talked about a lot on those Get Up shows and some of the other ESPN content machines over there. But like you said, looking back on July 24th, come mid-October, mid-November, what's something that we're not talking about now that might be noticed a lot later in the season when it comes to this Panthers team?
Man, I do think Xavier Legette, we see rookie wide receivers now produce at an incredibly high level. That did not used to be the case. When I started out in this industry, rookie receivers were guys like they didn't do anything. It was, you always expected at least a year before they produced. There's no reason Legette can't be a 1,200-yard receiver as a rookie. The opportunities are going to be there. The scheme fit is perfect. I mean, he can be that Mike Evans type receiver for this offense with, a little more yards after catch as opposed to some of the 50-50 stuff down the field. But that would be my thing. If we again, looking back to last year, some of the guys who broke out, like Puka Nacua was the big one. Obviously, he was a day 3 pick instead of a first-round pick. But, I would say that with Legette, if he is that rookie who's leading, all first-year guys in receptions or touchdowns, I will not be shocked, despite the fact that was a really, really good rookie wide receiver class.
Well, my last question for you, and you might have you could steal that as my last question here if you want to use that. That's fine. What is your bold prediction for the 2024 version of the Carolina Panthers? That's kind of the way I've been ending every podcast in this offseason.
Yeah.
And it could be team related, player related, however you want to do it.
I'll go the Panthers finish second in the South. I do think Atlanta wins it. There's too much firepower on offense with the veteran quarterback there. But I think it'll be a bounce back year, a jump up the ladder to where people are a year from now confident in Bryce Young, confident in the weapons that they have around him.
And in that bold prediction, how many wins do you see? Do we get the 7, like you said, 6, 7?
Let's go 7. I'll go 7. Yeah.
Okay. I think a lot of Panther fans would like that, finishing second and getting 7 wins for sure. Well, as I said at the top, my guest today has been Matt Miller of NFL Draft Scout Insider at ESPN. Matt, before I let you go, is there anything else you want to plug for our listeners here? Where can they find you and where can they get your stuff?
Yeah, like you mentioned, all across social media at NFL Draft Scout, and our draft content on ESPN is heating up. I've got multiple articles coming out in the next few weeks. So people subscribe to ESPN Plus, they'll be able to get all those right when they come out.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thanks so much for coming on Inside the Vault, and we'll talk to you down the road.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. And that'll wrap up this edition of Inside the Vault, episode number 44. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and we will see you next time.